Morgue, a short story by Wendy Webb. Read for you by Strickland. He wiped his greasy hands against the stained scrub suit, ignored the darkening, thick substance embedded under his fingernails, and took a bite of the mayonnaise and liverwurst sandwich. While counting every methodical chew, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, he pushed the soiled surgical instruments aside to place the remains of the sandwich. 9, 1,000, 10, 1,000, swallow. He followed the mush with a swig of cola and patted his back pocket for the flask. The flash of a wide smile revealed brilliant white teeth, lined evenly in a semicircle, and connected by a bridge for a mouth a little smaller than his. He clicked the teeth together, relished the sound, and patted the hand of the body lying outstretched before him. "We'll just get you cleaned up, on your way, before you know it." Another swig from the can and a bite of the sandwich. "But I guess it don't matter to you one way or the other." He tucked the sheet up under her chin and ran a finger across her sallow jawline. "It was your time, that's all. I knew it. I expect you knew it, too. Just doing my job." He chewed the last bit of his sandwich, crinkled the wax paper into a tight ball, and tossed it into the bucket below the steel table. A lengthy pull on the cola can and a swipe to his mouth with the back of his hand ended with a final toss to the bucket. The can bounced around inside and landed with a wet splash. "That's lunch." Tipping the scale plate swinging over his head, he deposited the contents into a jar, sealed the lid, and made a final entry on the clipboard that hung from the side of the table. With a grunt and a shift of his slight, aging body, he slid her onto a stretcher. He tucked the corners of the green sheet under the mattress, patted her hand again, then pushed her into a large, refrigerated room. The latch to the steel door was thrown with a click that echoed sharply off faded tile walls. Leaning against the closed door, he inhaled heavy breaths. It wasn't easy anymore, the logistics, the little tasks assigned to him because no one else would do it. His age, finally, was beginning to show. But then age was a relative thing. This job had lasted more decades than he could count some years ago. Tucked away in the bowels of the hospital, he did what a job description could only define in vague terms. That is, if anyone could find such a description, or even bothered to look. There wouldn't be one anyway. Nor would there be a personnel file tucked away among the bulging folders or computer sheets in the employment office. But that didn't matter, not really. His first and foremost job was most important, the one that counted. Like his colleagues, he took the job seriously. A deep rattle in his lungs became a barking cough. Massaging his chest as if it would help, he stepped over to the desk to complete the paperwork. Splintering wood caught the edge of his scrub suit and gouged a small hole. He tore off a sliver of wood, considered using it to coax out what he could reach under his fingernails, and then changed his mind. The time to take care of himself was later. Right now, there were more pressing things pulling his attention. He popped the wood piece into his mouth. The makeshift toothpick shifted from one side to the other and back again in choreographed motion with the now familiar teeth while he worked. He reached for a pen to sign off the body to a local funeral home. Lab test ordered, check. Appropriate request sheets filled out. Personal possessions accounted for. Death certificate completed. Check, check, check. "Useless, Mr. Mack. Waste of time." He threw a casual glance over his shoulder to the wall of steel body drawers behind him, then turned slightly in the chair so that no comment would be missed. "It was her time, Mr. Mack. No one knows that better than me. But the docs can't leave it alone, can they? Gotta mess with things, prove to themselves they knew what was wrong all along. He snorted in disgust, then shrugged with years' worth of seeing it happen again and again. Well, it's time, it's time. Let it go, I always say. He turned full around in the chair and pointed at the body drawer with a bent and swollen finger. You were the exception, Mr. Mack. They knew what they knew. At least they knew enough not to push it. So here we are, just two of us. Gotta say, though, I'm doing a damn sight better than you are. Laughter rumbled in his chest and turned into a liquid cough. He cleared his throat, massaged his chest, and continued the conversation. No medical students down here pushing and prodding on me, breaking bones just to fix them, sticking things where they ought not to be. His signature completed the paperwork. They think I don't know what they're doing, but I do. I've seen it all. That's okay. It'll be their time one day. Rubbing tired eyes, he leaned heavily into the chair. It'll be my time, too. Soon now, I expect. He folded the papers, tucked them neatly into an envelope, and slid them into a basket marked out. With great effort he stood, rubbed the small of his back with gnarled, arthritic hands, and clicked his teeth. See you shortly, Mr. Mack, he said, tapping a quick tune on the unmarked drawer. I'll be back before you know it. The stairs were quicker, but the wheezing in his chest decided the elevator. The long wait gave him a breather and a chance to plan his route. Well, Falls, honey, why don't you just give that man of yours a jab with a sharp stick? No one deserves what he's done to you, not a dog. No one. Two housekeepers wearing blue uniforms turned the corner with their utility carts. The younger one stopped suddenly at the sight of him. He nodded. Morning. Floss, what are you stopping for? Come on, we got things to do. Floss stared at him with wide eyes. The red of her lipstick formed a bright O on her mouth. Child, don't be giving that shriveled old prune of a man the time of day. He's crazy as a loon. I don't mind telling it to his face. Anybody does what he does has got to be crazy. Move, girl, we'll lose our lunch break if we don't get on with it. Floss gave a boost to her cart and started rolling. She followed her companion into a storage room with a glance back at him. Whispered words drifted through the closed door. That was the morgue man, wasn't it? I've heard of him. Stays down here with dead people. The morgue man. Yeah, honey, now you see him, so what? He's creepy. Makes the hair on my arm stand on end. More standing up on your arms than on that man of yours, if you get what I mean. He smiled at the conversation and clicked his teeth while thinking about the edge in Floss's voice, the look in her eye. Some people knew him and his job better than they knew themselves. They couldn't quite put a finger on it, narrow it down to a point, but they felt it at a gut level. He liked that. It made his job much easier when they knew, and when they didn't fight it. The door to the elevator opened. He stepped in, pushed a button absently, and waited. The old gears groaned with effort, then rose slowly upward. Ground floor, nothing there but offices, although his work had touched them too. First floor, emergency, operating rooms, intensive care. No, not today. Third floor, fourth, fifth floor. Here. The bell rang a tinny chime that indicated the end of his ride. The door opened and a handful of people who had waited past impatience pushed in. A student nurse spotted him, then backed out of the doorway to let him pass. Much obliged, miss, he said with a nod. She looked away and eased into the elevator amid the crowd and lunch chatter. Hope they have something in the cafeteria worth eating today. Not unless it's the cook. Peals of laughter filled the elevator. Geez, you could cut the hooch smell in here with a knife. You don't blame him, do you? If I worked with dead folks all day, I'd be drinking too. The elevator doors slid shut. No one's making him work there. I think he likes it. And then they were gone. He ambled down the hall of the pediatric wing. Cartoon characters in neon green and yellow painted costumes beamed two-dimensional, exaggerated expressions. A small child in surgical head covering and a gown was wheeled off to the staff elevators in a bright red wagon pulled by a nurse whose head covering hung from the side of her head, tangled in curly brown hair. She didn't seem to notice. "Now isn't this fun, Stacy? Before you know it, you'll be back in your room sleeping. When you wake up, you can have all the popsicles you want." Stacy was clearly not buying the story. She howled miserably and tried to climb out of the wagon. A firm seatbelt-type restraint held her in place. "Oh, grape, orange, cherry, you name it, it's yours. Ice cream, too." "Mama!" She looked over her shoulder for an escape accomplice. "No, go home." She screamed suddenly as the wagon disappeared behind the nurse's station. A small laugh caught in his throat at the little girl in her pitiful state. She would be fine. Not much interested in the promised ice cream when she got back, he bet, but she'd recover fast enough. He recognized the spunk in the child from a mile away. Nothing the size of a hospital could keep her down. He stopped suddenly in front of a door, hesitated, then walked past. Was it this one? Or over here? Shuffling slowly across the hall, then down the other side, he felt only the slightest stir. Taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes for a moment, to be sure, to feel it, to know beyond any doubt. Yes, there it was. The first door that had called to him. "I think he likes it." The words from the person in the elevator echoed in the back of his mind. Did he? Did he really like his job? He had never thought about it in that way before, never had a choice in the matter. It was something he had always done, just like this. By their calls, their choices, he came to ease them over, to see them through. He knew nothing else and couldn't remember a time when he hadn't done this very thing, and always as well or better than his colleagues. Yes, here. This room, there was no doubt. Looking up at the nameplate on the door, he read, "Palmetto, Jason, 7 years." He mouthed the child's name and felt a sadness at his youth and the hardship for the parents. It was easier when those who called were old and tired and had given up from long trying years. Easier. A little. But this time, right now, it was harder than he remembered it being before. Maybe his own time was closer than he thought. Still, he had a job to do, an important job. There was no one else. Running a finger across the information on the nameplate, he felt for the essence of the child in the room. The boy's darkness, pain, sadness, desolation, isolation, and unspent tears coursed through the morgue man's aging body and blackened his vision with fragments of the child's life. The red metallic bicycle with a special air horn. This child was never strong enough to ride it. A cocker spaniel named Chip that always slept by his side. Pizza and french fries, long since denied him with the illness. Buck, his best friend in the whole world. Laughter that wasn't forced. Christmas mornings with presents under a great tree. That time when there was no pain. That time so long ago. The morgue man stood outside the door with fists clenched around the stained material of his scrub suit and felt it all, saw it all. His chest tightened, forced air out, and forbade any to enter. Separate fragments from the child that were lost, broken, suffering, shifted in his mind, then joined a piece at a time to become complete and peaceful one last time. One last time. How many others had called before? So many. His legs shook and threatened to collapse under him. He leaned against the door for support. Concentrate. Palmetto. Jason. 7 years. Fragments joining. Goodbyes said. Completion. Whole again. The sum of its parts. The sum of experience. Passing. The morgue man turned away from the completed picture and forced it to move on. A brilliant white light exploded in his mind, then quickly dissipated to black. In seconds, it was over. He shook his head to clear his thoughts, opened his hands as if releasing a butterfly, and then walked away. A mother's wail from inside the room penetrated the closed door and spilled out into the hallway. Her sudden realization voiced a scream that turned to agonized keening. A nurse ran down the hall and pushed open the door. A red light blinked on and off over the jamb. Another nurse pushed an emergency cart in front of her and yelled for assistance. The door to the stairwell slammed open and gushed 4 more people in white, who knocked him to the floor. "Get the hell out of the way, you old geezer," said a voice. "We got an emergency." The morgue man pushed himself up and never looked back at the growing commotion. "Oh, let him go. There's nothing you can do." His voice was lost in the activity. He paused, shrugged, and knew they wouldn't listen anyway. No one ever did. But then they were doing their jobs too. They did what they had to do, what they were trained to do, even if it didn't matter. He pushed the button for the elevator, raised an eyebrow when the door opened almost immediately, and stepped in. "Basement, please," he muttered to the young doctor standing closest to the panel. "Say, I heard they called a code on the PEDS floor. What was it?" "I didn't ask." "Doesn't happen very often on that floor. Always good for a grand rounds or two, maybe even a journal article. I suppose if the kid doesn't make it, you'll know more about it than just about anyone, huh?" The tinny chime rang. The elevator door opened. "Well, this is my floor." Waiting in silence while the door closed, the morgue man punched the button and welcomed the vibration of the elevator descending to the basement. The doors opened to the dark hallway and the smell of decades' worth of chemicals. He inhaled deeply and followed the circuitous route back to the morgue. A quick key in the lock, and he was in. He blinked at the bright lights of the lab in comparison to the darkness he'd just left, and waited until his eyes adjusted. A sudden pain in his chest bent him double and forced a caught breath. He reached for the flask in his pocket, opened it, and took a deep swallow, and then another. Better. It was a little better now. A tentative smile settled on his lips. "You thought this was it, Mr. Mac, didn't you? Thought I'd be in that drawer right next to you before you could blink an eye. If you could blink an eye, that is." Staggering over to the drawer, he pulled it open and whipped back the plastic that covered the cadaver. "That is, if you had any eyes. They took those away from you almost longer than I can remember. You're just a shell of a man now, aren't you? A bag of skin and broken bones. Not much better than me, even if I do say so myself." He took a long swig from the flask and shrugged when there was no more. "Everybody's borrowed from you. Problem is, no one returns anything." The morgue man's wide smile revealed brilliant white teeth. A knock sounded on the door. It was soft, insistent. "Don't get up. It's for me. Just didn't expect it right this minute." Another stab of pain coursed through his chest and down his arm. He gasped, then shuddered. "Hold your water," he yelled to the door, then returned to Mr. Mack. "Professional courtesy. Not that we get a discount or anything." Grinning at his own joke, he turned to the steel table in the middle of the room. Another knock. I said in a minute. He turned on the water full force, sprayed down the table, and washed the overhead scale. He kicked the bucket across the room, turned it on its side, and emptied the contents. The wax paper from the sandwich stuck to the side. He pried it loose with shaking fingers and further lodged the darkening substance under his fingernails. After a quick spray of disinfectant, he rolled the bucket back in place under the table. He paused, took a less painful breath, and placed a set of forms on the clipboard. Then he reached for a new sheet from the linen closet and laid it gently at the end of the table. The boy deserved at least that. He sat down at the old desk and reached for a label. Typing the information cleanly and carefully, he dropped the sticker in his pocket. A final knock. There was no need to open the door. The knock was a formality, one colleague to another, and his colleagues were everywhere. Hospitals, highway intersections, football games, bedside in a private home. Anywhere there was a calling for his type of service, they were there. He looked toward the door. It would be nice to see his replacement, meet his colleague eye to eye, see the face of someone else who did what he did. Reaching for the latch, he stopped suddenly. There would be no conversation from the other side, no small talk. It wasn't necessary. Talk changed nothing. So what was the point in seeing? Except that it was an advantage only he had. A benefit of the job. But when all was said or done, was a final bit of curiosity worth it? And why should he have that moment when even a child like Jason wasn't allowed to see? No, he would accept it as he gave it. The morgue man reached in his pocket to pull out the carefully typed label. He stuck it on the drawer next to Mr. Mack and mouthed the name over and over. His name. He wished he had cleaned his fingernails